Hi, everybody. Welcome along to our small, intimate press conference today. Thanks for braving the pandemic to come and see us. As you see, we're taking all precautions we can, but do continue to wear your mask if it doesn't make you feel uncomfortable. Well, today our speaker is Makoto Watanabe. He's the editor-in-chief of what used to be called the Waseda Chronicle, and it's now called Tansa. Sorry, Investigative Newsroom Tansa. I hope I've got the name right. Yeah. He is no stranger to the club. We've written about him, and I think he has talked to us before. Just to give you some background, Watanabe-san was part of an innovative investigative unit at the Asahi Shimbun. He quit after the newspaper a famous incident where the newspaper retracted an article on the paper's coverage of the Fukushima nuclear accident. The article had revealed chaos at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant during the 2011 disaster. The Asahi president announced its retraction in September 2014. Watanabe-san and his colleague Hideaki Kimura they quit the newspaper and founded the Waseda Chronicle, which is was an online non-profit investigative newspaper. They used to operate in a small office. That's where I interviewed them a couple of years ago. The newspaper wants to plug what it sees as a gap in investigative journalism in Japan. The mainstream media, they argue, have been narcotized by advertising and the press club system. Official sources from the government down drip feed information to the press. It doesn't occur to most journalists to chase down stories, to investigate stories, he says, and that's where they come in. Among their current projects, and I think the project that Watanabe-san is going to talk most about today, is aggressive sales tactics by Japanese newspapers as they fight declining circulations. Thousands of complaints every year are made regarding elderly people often suffering from dementia, being pressured to take out subscriptions. The Japanese media notes Watanabe-san, perhaps understandably, has not picked up on this story. We're hoping he will also talk about some of the other scoops and other the investigative projects that his newspaper is involved in. We have several young reporters from the newspaper here. I was talking to them earlier on. The translator today, or the interpreter I should say, is, hope I got this right, Annalise Giesbert. Is that right? Geisbert. My apologies, Geisbert. She's going to be your interpreter. Can I remind you to switch off your cell phones if you haven't already done so? By the way, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is David McNeil. I'm the co-chair of the PAC committee at this club. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us at the FCCJ today. So the topic we are going to discuss is about Japanese newspapers. So the Japanese media has not raised this issue themselves. So we would like your help to introduce this topic to a wider audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us today. はい、どうぞ。
じゃあ、From now Japanese。まずですね、この、問題のきっかけ、取材するきっかけになった出来事がありました。これはですね、ある、80代の高齢の女性が、認知症なんですけども、朝日新聞、読売新聞、産経新聞、毎日新聞、この4紙とですね、契約してたと。で、たまたまそのご自宅に行った娘さんがそれを見つけて、お母さんに聞くと、なんで契約したのかわからないということがありました。
So the reason we started looking into this topic of elderly individuals being coerced into taking out newspaper subscriptions is because we found there was a case of a woman in her mid-80s who was showing signs of dementia. She had taken out subscriptions to 4 different national newspapers, the Asahi, Sankei, Mainichi, and Yomiuri papers. And when her daughter discovered that her mother had taken out 4 different subscriptions, she was really surprised this has happened.
昔からですね、新聞販売の現場っていうのは、インテリが書いてヤクザが売るということは長年言われてきました。ただですね、自分自身の経験から言ってもですね、認知症のお年寄りとか そういった人にまで、押し売りをするというのは聞いたことがなかったので非常に驚きました。
So maybe in the past there might have been rumors that with newspaper distributors there might have even been some Yakuza involvement, but where it's unknown if that story is true. And actually based on Watanabe-san's personal experience working for a newspaper distributor between high school and his university years, there was nothing like that. And in fact, there was no coercive soliciting that he saw.
それでこういったことが本当に今頻繁に起きているのかということを調べるために国民生活センターに情報公開請求をかけたところ、月にですね100件以上の苦情ですね、こういった認知症のお年寄りであるとか、あと目が不自由なお年寄りで、特に一人暮らしですよねのお年寄りを狙って押し売りが行われていると。でそういったことに対する苦情が月100件来てましたと。
So then to start our investigation, we sent a Freedom of Information request to the National Consumer Affairs Center of Japan, which compiles complaints and requests for advice from consumer affairs centers across the country. And we asked for descriptions of those cases relating to newspapers and elderly individuals. And what we found, based on 3 months of cases that we examined, was that over 100 cases per month pertain to elderly individuals and newspapers. And often these cases involve elderly individuals with showing signs of dementia or with bad eyesight, and often elderly individuals who are living alone.
はい、でこれは今3つ抽出してピックアップしました。これ2020年4月の例ですね。2020年4月といえば4月から5月にかけてコロナで緊急事態宣言が出てた時ですよね。でこの緊急事態宣言の時でもですね、高齢者の自宅に行って押し売りをしていると。で一番上は認知症のお年寄り、一人暮らしのお年寄りのところに押し売り。で次はですね、これは外国の方はご存じないかもしれないですけども、新聞の購読を契約するときに先起こしという言葉があって、これは例えば1年間は朝日新聞をこれから契約します。そしてその1年後は次は読売新聞を契約します。さらにその2年後は今度は毎日新聞ですというように、ずっと先まで契約で埋まると。でそういう形でずっと契約さすっていうのを先起こし、それがこの2番目の例ですね。だから今から、2年の契約を、やってくださいと。で3つ目の、例もですね、これはひどいなと思うんですけども、要は目が見えないと。で高齢になって目が不自由になっているにもかかわらず、どうせ新聞が読めないからもうそんな購読できないからと言ってもそれでも売ると。これらの例から言うとこれはもうほとんど犯罪ですよね。
So here you can see there are 3 examples that we picked up from among the cases that were reported in April 2020. And as I'm sure you all know, that was just the beginning of the pandemic sort of ratcheting up in Japan. It was when the first state of emergency was issued by the government. But despite the pandemic and the state of emergency, we could see from these cases no substantial decrease in the number of coercive solicitations to elderly individuals. So from these 3 examples, you can see a couple different patterns. The first, as I mentioned before, of elderly individuals with dementia and living alone. And in this instance, the woman was even a little bit frightened by the solicitor who wouldn't take no for an answer and then ended up taking out a subscription. So then the second example that we picked up here, again, with an elderly woman living alone and was just really, I guess, aggressively asked to take out a subscription. But then the point here is that the subscription is a 2-year subscription starting 3 years from now. So this is a technique that maybe, at least in my experience, I had never heard of it abroad. But in Japan, sometimes newspaper subscriptions will start multiple years in the future, as in this case. And this is because, like, for example, if a person is currently subscribed to paper A, but then a solicitor from paper B comes, they'll say, oh, okay, well, we'll wait till your contract with paper A ends, but then you can take out a subscription from our paper starting a few years down the line. So they're, I guess, securing those subscriptions for the future. And then the last one, the third one, is again an elderly woman living alone. And she remembers the solicitor stayed for a whole 30 minutes. But this woman has bad eyesight, so it's probably very difficult for her to read the paper. But even if she refused, saying, even if I took out a subscription, I wouldn't be able to read it, the solicitor just didn't take no for an answer, and she ended up taking out that subscription.
Okay. で重要なのはですね、こういった国民生活センターに相談寄せてこられる人っていうのは、その家族が見つけてくれるとか、あと介護のヘルパーさんが見つけてくれるとか、でそういった人たちがいたからこそ相談が寄せられているわけですね。ところが本当に家族と疎遠になっているお年寄りの場合ですね、相談できないですよね。しかも認知症を患っていたら余計できないと。なのでこういった国民生活センターに月100件の苦情が来てますけども、こういった事例っていうのは本当にごく一部、実際はもっと多くのですね被害者がいると思われます。
So another important point about this issue is that often the complaints that are made to consumer affairs centers, they are from elderly people who have a strong support system. They either have family members looking out for them, or maybe some sort of caregiver comes to their house regularly, for example. But there are plenty of elderly individuals in Japan who don't have that kind of support system, who don't have people checking in on them regularly, and who can advocate for them if an issue comes up. So although we have found, based on our Freedom of Information requests, that a little over 100 cases per month seems to be average, but it could be just the tip of the iceberg because there probably are elderly individuals who cannot advocate for themselves.
はい、ここでちょっと日本の新聞社の仕組みをお伝えします。新聞の販売をする新聞販売店というのは、新聞を発行する新聞社とは別会社なんですね。なので新聞社にとっては新聞販売店は取引先ということになります。ただし対等な関係ではなくですね、新聞社の販売局、本社の販売局がその販売店を統括して指導する立場です。圧倒的に力が強いです。だからよく新聞販売店で不祥事が起きたときに新聞社が出すコメントは、取引先がこういったことをしましたというふうにちょっと責任をね回避する言い方をしますけども、実際はしっかりですねコントロールしているというこの力関係を把握していただきたいと思います。
So to explain a little bit about how the system works in Japan for distributing newspapers, so the distributors are contracted by newspaper companies to distribute their papers, but they're in fact a separate company from the paper itself. However, the newspaper company is much larger than the individual distributors and will give them directions and tell them how to conduct their business to a certain extent. And so in this system, although the distributors are the ones sending their solicitors and sales agents to go knock on people's doors and try to make a sale. In this system overall, the newspaper companies are much larger and have much more power.
はい、それでじゃあ、日本の新聞社は、新聞の業界は、どういう態度をとっているかというとですね、日本新聞協会というのは、このこういった修理を防止するためのですね不詳性勧誘、つまり相手がもう来ないでくれという意思を示した人にはもう勧誘しませんと、セールスをしませんというのを不詳性勧誘というんですけども、これを禁止するという特定商取引法の改正の動きがあったんですけども、日本新聞協会はこれに強く反対しました。
So to speak a little bit about how the major Japanese newspapers view this issue, we looked into an instance in 2015 when Japan's Consumer Commission was considering amending the Specified Commercial Transactions Act, which is a law regulating sales activities, etc. And so in 2015, the government was considering whether to amend the act to ban unwelcome soliciting, where people have made it clear that they do not want a salesperson to come try and make a sale with them. However, the Japan Newspaper Publishers and Editors Association, when they participated in a hearing as this amendment was being considered, they strongly objected to the law being amended and to unwelcome soliciting being made, being clearly made illegal.
はい、この時ですね、消費者庁の課長は、こういったセールスは、その認知症のお年寄りを食い物にしていると、ここまで言ったんですけども、ところが、新聞協会の反対にあって法改正は実現しなかったというぐらいですね、日本の場合メディアの方が強い場合があるんですよね。でこの時強く反対したのは新聞協会の理事で山口さんですね。今の新聞協会の会長であり読売新聞の社長です。
So then when this amendment was being considered at the Consumer Commission, at an expert committee, the head of the Consumer Affairs Agency's Consumer Transaction Division, when he was giving responses to questions in the meeting, he specifically stated that that solicitors, he used the expression, prey upon elderly individuals. However, as I mentioned before, when the major Japanese newspapers were asked for their input, they strongly objected to this amendment. And the representative of the Japan Newspaper Publishers and Editors Association that participated in these meetings was then board member Yamaguchi, who is from the Yomiuri Group. Who's president?
Yes. Okay. Next. でこうしたその新聞業界が、この押し売りにしっかり取り組まないと、押し売り防止に取り組まないという背景にですね、新聞の部数の減少があるわけですね。でこの減少のスピードはすごく速まっていて、2019年から2020年にかけて年間で270万部減少しました。
So then, to give some more background of this issue, in terms of circulation of newspapers in Japan, or physical copies of newspapers in Japan, in recent years there's been a steady and steep drop in circulation every year. And even in just the last year, or from 2019 to 2020, there was a 2.7 million copy drop in circulation. So we sort of wonder whether this sort of declining sales, declining circulation, might make papers feel a little bit more pressured to get those subscriptions.
Okay. そうした背景があったんですね。はい、それでですね、じゃあ、実際この高齢者への悪質な新聞販売がどこで行われているのかというと、我々探査はですね、日本の全国の新聞社50社に質問状を送りました。で、回答が返ってきたのはそのうち21社しかないんですけども、全国紙の方は毎日新聞はそういった押し売りはありますと認めました。で、産経朝日はこれはしっかり否定しない、はぐらかしてるんですよね、回答ね。で、日経はないって言ってました。日経は経済紙ですから、お年寄りに新聞を販売するという場面が少ないということだと思います。で、読売新聞は電話で催促しましたけど回答がないと。今の新聞協会の会長であり最も部数が多い新聞社ですが、こういうことにちゃんと対応しないと。で、地方紙に関しては我々はそういった押し売りの販売はしておりませんという回答が多かったです。なので全体的に見るとやはり全国紙を中心にこうした高齢者への悪質な販売が行われているのではないかと。でその理由は、これは私の見方ですけども、やはり経営状態がですねまだ地方紙の方がいいんですね。全国紙の方が経営が厳しいということが理由にあると思います。
So then, as another part of our investigation, we sent questions to 50 papers throughout Japan, both national papers and regional papers, and we asked them specifically whether they were aware of coercive soliciting existing among their distributors. And from those 50 papers, only 21 responded. But within those 21 responses, we thought we could maybe see a trend. Or to start with the responses from the national papers, the Mainichi Shimbun acknowledged the existence of coercive soliciting of elderly individuals among its distributors, but said it was working to improve the situation. And then the Asahi Shimbun and Sankei Shimbun did not deny the presence of coercive soliciting, but they were also kind of vague in their response. And the Yomiuri Shimbun did not respond at all, even after we called asking or reminding them to send us an answer. And just a point is that the Yomiuri Shimbun has the highest circulation of any paper in Japan. We didn't, and then, but all, and the Nikkei Shimbun was the only national paper that gave us a flat denial that that they said coercive soliciting was definitely not happening within among their distributors. So when it comes to regional papers, we heard back from a number of them, but all of them denied coercive soliciting among their distributors. Of course, there are some papers that didn't respond, but from the responses we received, we can see a trend that probably coercive soliciting takes place more among national papers than among regional papers. And this is just Watanabe-san's opinion, but maybe the reason for this is because regional papers are probably doing a little bit better financially in recent years than national papers.
はい、でこの状況ですね、どういう状況かって、要するにですね、新聞社と政府はもう癒着してるんじゃないかと。でなぜそう思うかというとですね、皆さんはご存知でしょうかね、2019年の10月に日本の消費税は 8% から 10% に上がりました。でこの時に 8% のまま軽減税率が適用されたのは食料品とあと新聞だけなんですね、宅配の。で他の例えば公共料金とか、赤ちゃんのおむつだってそうですよね。それで他の書籍もそう、インターネットメディアもそう、すべて軽減税率は適用されません。これは新聞だけの特権です。でこういう特権を享受している新聞の宅配だけに軽減税率が適用されていながら、そこで起こっている出来事、もう犯罪ですよね、はっきり言って。こういったことに対して政府はしっかり対処しないと。で消費者庁の担当者に取材すると、いやなかなかできませんねと。で警察が一罰100回でやってくれればいいんですけどねというような、こんないい加減な態度ですね。で一方で、これ新聞各紙も取り上げましたけども、かんぽ生命の時の不正販売ありましたよね。あの時もお年寄りを狙ってですね、押し売りをして、でかんぽ生命は業務停止処分を受けました。だけど新聞は全くそういったペナルティを受けません。これはもう政府とそして新聞社の癒着と言っていいというふうに私は思います。
So we'd like to question what this issue of coercive soliciting says about the relationship between Japan's newspapers and the Japanese government. For example, we think a really representative example of this relationship is that physical papers, newspapers, were exempted from the tax hike a couple of years ago. I think it was the fall of 2019. And so when the consumption tax rate went from 8 to 10%, the only items exempted from that hike were food products and physical newspapers. But it seems a little bit illogical why that exception was made, because other items that could be considered daily necessities or serve a similar role in society to newspapers, like for daily necessities, for example, like diapers, or for internet media, whether or not it's free or whether or not you have to pay a subscription fee, it was not exempted from the tax hike. So yeah, we think this is an example of a little bit of special treatment for newspaper companies. And then another point that we found during our investigation when we spoke with a member of the Consumer Affairs Agency, which obviously looks after consumer issues, when we asked them whether the government was taking any steps to respond to this issue of coercive soliciting, which is especially harming elderly individuals. The individual the person there we spoke with said that the government was taking no particular steps at this point, but that since physical newspapers is sort of a dying industry, that the problem will eventually go away on its own. But if we look at different examples of similar cases that have happened even in recent years in Japan, like for example the Japan Post health insurance scandal, where they were found to have been, pressuring or getting elderly individuals to take out health insurance in a fraudulent manner. When that case was revealed, there was a strong reaction against it. And and it was treated as a crime and put an end to. But when similar things happen with newspaper subscriptions, there's a really minimal response to this issue.
Just on a point of clarity, sorry, I just want to check something. The word that you used, Watanabe-san, was yuchaku, yeah? Yuchaku. So, 新聞と政府は癒着してると. So my understanding of yuchaku, the word is it's collusive. So would that be correct? It's a collusive relationship between the newspapers and the government. Is that okay? Just for English translation, yeah?
I think it's a little bit maybe stronger in English than in Japanese, but sort of like a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of relationship.
Thank you. Sorry.
はい、で今言葉の問題ありましたけど、なぜそれだけ癒着という強い言葉を使うかというと、これは私の取材の結果です。例えばですね、日本の新聞社はこの軽減税率が適用されていることについて、私たちは民主主義に必要な情報を国民に広くね、お伝えしているという、だから、それは適用されて当たり前だというような言い方をしてますけども、ただ当時ですね、軽減税率を新聞に適用するにあたって、財務省の官僚がどういうふうに考えていたかっていうと、財務省としてはですね、これは困ったなと、理屈を作るのは大変だと、なぜ新聞だけに軽減税率を適用するのか、どうやって、国民に説明したらいいのだろうかと、非常に困ったと、言っています。じゃあなんで困ったのに、適用したかということについては今取材中で、その証拠を、取っているところです。これで終わりますね。
So to just give a little bit more explanation why we would use a word that could be translated as strongly as collusive, just based on other reporting that Watanabe-san has conducted he's heard through his reporting that finance ministry officials were really sort of at a loss as to what reason to give for newspapers being exempted from the tax hike. So they had difficulties finding a reason to explain this special treatment. So I guess there was an awareness that it was unusual.
Thank you very much. Well, we have about 30 minutes left for Q&A, and I am going to take the first question, if that's okay. One of the sort of interesting things, I suppose, just if we broaden the discussion out, to discuss, I'll take my mask off, to discuss Japanese journalism is, as Watanabe-san says, there are very few scoops in the newspapers, but the weeklies, the Shukanshi seem to have a lot of scoops, and particularly Bunshun, Shukan Bunshun lately has had a string of scoops related to the Olympics. I wonder if Watanabe-san might comment on that. What do you think is the role? Do the weeklies in Japan perform the role that newspapers perform in America and Europe? Would that be a fair question?
大丈夫。そう。週刊文春の役割とか。
ですね、日本の新聞はですね、読者の信頼を失っているだけではなくですね、不正を告発しようという内部告発者の信頼も失っていると思います。今、週刊文春が非常に頑張っていて、スクープをオリンピックの問題をはじめ、いろいろスクープを出していますが、文春とその新聞社、他のメインストリームメディアの違いというのは、多分文春は戦うからです。だけど新聞は途中で折れてしまう。ちゃんと戦ってるというふうに、少なくとも自分たちは戦ってると思ってるかもしれないけども、外からはそう見えていない。だから情報が文春に集中する。一つ例を挙げると、例えば今回文春に対してスクープした文春に対して五輪の組織委がね、開会式の内容をスクープしたということで抗議しましたよね。あの時に新聞社はほとんど沈黙しましたね、他のメディアは。本来だったら同じ同業者として五輪組織委に対して抗議するべきですね。なんでこんなことでプレッシャーをかけてくるんだと。ところが戦わない新聞社。朝日新聞は社会面で大きく扱ってましたけども、あれにしても両論併記。組織委の言い分はこうだけど学者専門家は表現の自由も大事だよと言っていると。両論併記でごまかしてますよね。明確に自分たちのスタンスを示してないと。そういったのを見ると、やはりああいったところにですね、自分の大事な内部告発の情報を持っていこうと思いません。この差が今出てきていると思います。
So to speak about the, for example, Shukan Bunshun getting a number of scoops recently, Watanabe-san can see that this is, I guess, indicative of papers, or the traditional newspapers, losing not only the public's trust, but also the trust of whistleblowers as well. So when people want to bring a given piece of information to the media, they're starting to go more to the weekly magazines such as Shunkan Bunshun. And so for one example of this, we also paid attention to the, I guess, the reaction from Japan's papers after Shunkan Bunshun got a scoop about the Olympics. Like, for example, they revealed plans for the opening ceremony, and then the government was naturally unhappy about this and asked them to retract it. But Shunkan Bunshun obviously refused to do so, and they're, I guess, resisting the pressure that's being put on them, and people around them are noticing that. People with information would notice that, and then would identify them as a place to bring their information to. However, just in the specific instance of the authorities asking, or the government asking Bunshun to retract its article about the opening ceremony, the major papers don't really delve into this issue, or they don't take a stand and say, like, the government has no right to ask a fellow media organization to retract a perfectly fairly acquired scoop. Rather, the major papers just sort of present both sides of the issue, saying like, oh, such and such specialist said this, and then such and such government representative said this. And so they don't really take a strong stand on an issue that concerns their own industry.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to scan the room to see if anybody has a question. If you have one, can you put up your hand? I saw Calden's hand first, and then this gentleman second. Don't forget to tell us who you are when you come to the mic. Thanks.
Thank you for coming. Khaldun Azhari, Panoramic News. Thanks, David, for this event. My first question, how much percentage of the subscription pushed by solicitors compared to the total subscription? Like how many subscribers they managed to get out of the total subscription? Do you have any information about this? How much they are successful? And secondly, NHK gets money from everybody by law. So do you think the newspapers feel they should be treated the same, so they use this Yakuza style to get subscription as long as NHK is taking the law to get subscriptions? And just a short question: do you have investigative about international and diplomatic issues between Japan and other countries, not only about local issues? Thank you.
Sorry. Just a second question one more time, if you don't mind. I didn't catch it. But NHK.
NHK, like everybody has to pay a fee for NHK. It's by the law, I think. So do newspapers feel they have to be treated same and equal to NHK? And because they don't get this treatment, they use this Yakuza-like subscription pushing. Thank you.
はい、まず1番目ですけども、全体の部数の中の押し売りのパーセンテージ、これは分からないですね、正直言って。で、なぜなら、まず一つは先ほど言った、国民生活センターに寄せられる苦情というのはこれごく一部ですよね。っていうのは一つ。あと、これが最大の原因ですけども、今回全国の新聞社に、どれぐらいの、押し売りがあるかと質問しましたが、それについて回答した社はありません。本来だったら、報道機関ですから彼ら調査能力もあります。自分の社のことです。それ自ら調査して、押し売りが自分たちの全体の部数のうち、何%あるということを公表しなければいけませんけども、これやってません。これ怠慢ですよね。なので、むしろ私が知りたい。これは。で、皆さんでプレッシャーをかけてちゃんと調べろということを、やって圧力をかけてほしいです。
So in response to your first question about the percentage of total subscriptions that might come from coercive soliciting, the honest answer is we don't know. Because I guess for multiple reasons. One is that the number of complaints sent to consumer affairs centers could just be one small part of the total. And another is, for example, just within the scope of our own investigation, that even when we sent questions to 50 of Japan's papers, only like 21 of them responded. So there's still lots of information that we don't know as well. And Japan's papers themselves have not proactively investigated this issue, as we've said. So obviously they're not offering any numbers about the percentage of coerced subscriptions. So that's why we would like all of your help to help raise this issue and to get some more clarity for the extent and the scope of the harm that's being done.
はい、NHK の受信料、新聞購読料で経営している新聞社で、我々はドネーションモデルです。なのでドネーションお願いしますで、それは冗談で、確かに NHK のモデルは羨ましいですよね。羨ましいし、それだけの仕事をしてるかどうかって人、それぞれの評価だと思いますけども、 NHK の場合は、そういった潤沢な資金をもとに、NHK スペシャルをはじめ非常にいい番組を制作されていると思います。ただし政治と戦わないですよね、ギリギリのところで。という弱さだから、このままではですね、結局新聞社がどんどん経営が悪くなっていく。で、雑誌も大変ですよね。で、我々みたいな、非営利独立のメディア、これもまだまだ小さいっていう中、 NHK だけが受信料をもとに大きくなっていく、一強状態になっていくと思うんですね。これだったら非常に危険だと思います。なぜなら NHK は政治と戦えないから。という意味で私は危機感を覚えている。で、受信料をそういうふうな徴収の仕方でやるっていうのは羨ましいし、あとはその受信料だけじゃなくてさまざまな予算がついてますよね。我々ジャジットという国の事業、税金の使い方をですね検索できるデータベースを持っています。ぜひTansaのサイトから試してほしいんですけども、日本放送協会と打ち込むといかに国の予算が NHK についてるか分かります。だから受信料だけでなく税金も入っている。これはまあかなり、羨ましいなと。不平等かどうかはこれは人によると思います。
Okay, so to answer your second question about NHK versus other media in Japan, it's true that NHK has, I guess, a more comfortable business model because people have to pay for the service. But obviously, whether, I guess, your own evaluation of the reporting that NHK does is up to the individual. In Watanabe-san's opinion, NHK has a lot of really great programs, but maybe sometimes they don't do enough to question the government when it deserves to be questioned and fulfill the watchdog function. So, yeah, newspapers have a more, I guess, a more difficult business model, and independent online media like us also are still really small and struggling to make it financially. And so among this, as newspaper circulation decreases and there's still no like concrete path to success for independent media, but NHK can just continue the way it is or continue to grow. And so that might be a dangerous trend because if it doesn't sufficiently fulfill its watchdog function, then who will fulfill that role? But if you want to know more, I guess, about where the NHK's money comes from, you can try using a database that we have helped create. It's available on our website. It's called Judge It, and it's only in Japanese, unfortunately, but you can search it to see how the national budget is used. And if you search NHK, then there'll be information about NHK's budget as well.
Colin had a question about whether you cover foreign diplomacy stories, foreign stories.
Tansa のですね、特徴は、国際コラボレーションです。で、これまでもですね、イギリスのガーディアンと東京の都営団地の孤独死の問題を一緒にやったり、あと石炭火力発電ですね、これの輸出ですよね。インドネシアであるとか、そういったアジアに向けた輸出、これがいかに不平等で、そこで今また捜査がインドネシア当局がやってるんですけども、そういった石炭火力発電の輸出はあれはインドネシアのメディア、韓国のメディアと一緒にコラボしてやりました。そして、あとは、最近で言うと、加熱式タバコのアイコスですね。これフィリップ・モリスが売ってるやつですけども、これはいかに日本で爆発的に売れていったかと、いかにごまかしがあったかということをOCCRP という、オーガナイズクライム専門の、探査報道の、プロジェクトチームですけども、そこと含めた世界10カ国で一緒にコラボで取材をしました。っていうようにこれからの、問題他にもいろいろコラボで今、取材を進めてるやつあります。まだ出てませんけども、とにかくこれからはもうどんな問題も国境を越えるので、いかに国際コラボレーションをやって、そして、情報を世界で駆け巡らせてですね、で事態を変えていくかということが重要になっていくと思います。
So the short answer to your question is yes, we definitely do cover international stories if Japan is involved. For example, up till now, we've done a number of international collaborations with foreign or overseas media organizations. Like, for example, with The Guardian, we investigated the phenomenon of solitary deaths of elderly individuals living in public housing in the Tokyo area. Or, for example, with media organizations in Indonesia and South Korea, we investigated coal-fired power plants in Indonesia that Japanese and South Korean financial institutions are funding and helping support. And then another example is that we participated in a project led by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project that looked into heated tobacco products, specifically the IQOS device sold by Philip Morris, and the the marketing techniques and other ways that Philip Morris tries to promote its heated tobacco product, and whether or not, or I guess I don't know, how they're bending the truth regarding heated tobacco. And so those are some past examples of projects that we have already done, but we're currently also in the middle of a number of international collaborations. So you can look forward to more in the future.
Thank you. This gentleman here, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Richard Susilo from Indonesia. You are mentioning about the media from Indonesia. Which media from Indonesia you are collaborating? And what is the process right now? Second question regarding the, you said that the rural financial 地方の方に、経済力ですね。the rural financial is better than the center of Japan. So could you elaborate about this one? Why the financial strength in rural area is better than in center of Japan? And also, the third question regarding what will happen to the newspaper in Japan, because everybody is, including Indonesia, also there goes online right now, also in the world. So do you think the newspaper will bankrupt in Japan? Thank you very much.
はい、まず最初の質問ですけども、店舗と一緒にやりました。で、このきっかけは我々はグローバル・インベスティゲイティブ・ジャーナリズム・ネットワークのオフィシャルメンバーです、GIGN の。で、これが唯一日本の報道機関としては我々加盟してるんですけども、この GIGN というのはすごく貴重な、コラボレーションでして、ネットワークでして、カンファレンスが世界大会が2年に1回あるんですけども、アジア大会も2年に1回で、そういったカンファレンスとかの場で知り合うんですよね。それで一緒にこのネタテーマでコラボしないかというようなマッチングというか交渉をそういったカンファレンスとかを通じてやります。で、店舗とはそういったきっかけで知り合ってコラボしました。
So to answer your first question about our partner media in Indonesia, we work with Tempo, which you probably know. And we are a member of the Global Investigative Journalism Network. We're the first Japanese organization to become an official member. And so as a member, we participate in the international conferences or regional conferences that GIJN holds. And at these international conferences, there are lots of opportunities to meet with journalists from other countries and discuss potential stories that we could collaborate on. So that's how our partnership with Tempo began.
はい、で2番目のなぜ地方紙の方が強いかと経営的に安定するかなんですけども、これも私の意見ですけども、地方紙の場合はやはり地域に密着した情報を報道してるんですよね。だから強いと、お客さんがなかなか離れない。で例えばこれも僕が朝日新聞で地方にいた時の経験ですけども、地方紙がなぜ強いかって言った時にですね、その地方紙の人が冗談で、それはお悔やみ欄があるからだと。でお悔やみ欄が詳しいと。お悔やみ欄って何かって言ったら、誰か地域の人が亡くなった時にお葬式はいつありますと、こんな人柄の人でしたっていうのが 2,3 行あってですね、それを見て地域の人たちはじゃあお葬式に行かなきゃとかお悔やみを言わなきゃというような参考にします。そういったローカルな非常に密着した情報が地方紙はあるので、だから安定しているということだと思います。
So a reason that regional newspapers are in a, I guess, a safer financial position than national newspapers is that well, this is just Watanabe-san's personal opinion, but it can be said that they have a maybe this wording is a little strange, but like a captive audience, that they are the only source of information for that community or for that area. So because they carry local information and not just like not just local stories, but also information about local residents, like for example, obituaries or information about when the funeral of such and such person who passed away is being held. So it's a really valuable source of information for those communities, and it's really fulfilling a role for those communities. Yeah, so that's why they're in a bit more stable financial position than national papers.
で、3つ目の日本の新聞社がどうなるか、これも私の意見ですけども、とにかく日本の新聞社は大きすぎるんですよね。だから、昔の一番ピーク時の読売新聞で1000万部とかですね、朝日の800万部とか、異常ですよね。こんなに部数の多い新聞社はなかった。世界中でない。で、とにかく大きい。で、その大きさを支えていた、部数を支えていたのは宅配制度なんですよね。でまさにその宅配制度で今回のような問題が起きているから自分たちの生命線だからこういう犯罪まがいのことをしてでも部数を守りたがるということだと思うんですけども、とにかく、読みたくて読んでるというような駅売りとかコンビニで買うとかってことではなくて、宅配制度に支えられて大きくなりすぎた。でこの大きくなりすぎたことが今大変な、重荷になっていて、毎年、先ほどご紹介したように全国で270万部の部数が減っていくと。でこのままの計算でいくと、例えば全国紙なんかでいうともう10年後には部数がゼロになるんじゃないかと、いう状況ですよね。じゃあどうするかっていうことなんですけども、僕はもう新聞社の人間でもないし経営者でもないので、自分たちが頑張るしかないというだけなんですけど。だけど新聞社のことを、ご質問があったのでお答えするならば、とにかく例えば今、500万部ある全国紙が、100万部になったとします。100万部に減るってすごいですよね。昔800万部とかあったんだから。でだけど100万部自体減っても100万部ってそれでもすごいですよね、部数としては。だけど問題は社員が多いってことですよ、数が。記者だけで2000人とかいるわけですね、全国紙だと。でこれだけの数の社員がいるとやはり部数の減少に追いついていかない。だからもうどうしようもないですよね。なので僕もノーアイデアで、もしあるとしたら例えば吸収合併するとか、どっか例えばアマゾンとかヤフーとかああいったところと一緒になるとかっていう道しかないんじゃないですかね。ただそうやって合併するにしても合併したいと思ってもらえるようなスリムな組織になっていないとなかなかそこも難しいと。
渡辺さん、ちょっと待ってくださいね。かわいそうと思ってるから。
Thank you. Okay, so about your third question of the future of Japan's papers. This is again just Watanabe-san's opinion, but I guess the national papers were already too big to start with. Too big to be sustainable perhaps. Like for example, Yomiuri, the paper with the highest circulation in Japan and I believe also in the world. It's had an incredibly large circulation. But this system was supported by the delivery, like door-to-door delivery of papers, rather than, for example, papers being purchased at a convenience store or wherever. So because the delivery system and the sales network was, I guess, evolved and optimized to a certain extent, it was able to support this really high circulation level. But of course, as we talked about before in the beginning, the circulation numbers are dropping dramatically every year at a rate of recently around 2 or 2.5 million copies per year. So who knows what will happen in 10 years? Will it be next to nothing? It's hard to say. And another comment about the already large size of Japanese national papers is that like a single paper would employ around 2,000 reporters. And so they would also have a circulation figures that would support that kind of high level of staff as well. So maybe in the future, Japanese papers might be forced to join with like larger tech companies like Amazon or Yahoo in order to support themselves financially. But It's hard to say.
じゃあちょっともう一個それでですね、じゃあ、どうすればいいかっていうことなんですけど、新聞社、ね、潰れるの仕方ないじゃないかと言ってもいいのかっていうことなんですけど、そこはそこで問題があると思います。なぜならやはりジャーナリストをですね一人前にする教育でちゃんと取材をして正確な情報を記事にしていくという作業を一人前にするのはですね、かなりやっぱ訓練がいるんですよね。でそういった訓練教育機能一人前にしていくだけの時間とコストを新聞社がとかテレビ局ですよね、そういったこれまでのメディアが担っていたと。もしそれがなくなったらどうなるのか。みんなインターネットだから気軽に情報を発信できるけども、本当にプロとして耐えうるだけの情報を発信できるのか。でここの社会的コストみたいなところを新聞社が担えなくなった時に、じゃあ誰が担うのかという問題は日本にとって深刻だと思いますね。だからヤフーとかああいったプラットフォームはですね、新聞社から記事を今買ってそこのプラットフォームで流してますけども、だけどその情報自体を取材して発信するだけの教育するためのコストを育てるコストですよね。これは新聞社が払ってきたんです、これまで。だからそれが新聞社がなくなってきた時に、じゃあ皆さんどうしますかっていうのは我々自身が社会全体で考えなくちゃいけないと思います。
So another point is that as we can see, the newspaper industry is in decline, but what should we do when we see that? Should we just leave newspaper companies to their fate, or should we, think more about where Japanese society is going with this issue? And in Watanabe-san's opinion, what's really important is to train journalists and to make sure that people have the skills of journalists in Japan. Because even if media companies come and go, what's really important for the public is people with journalistic skills, especially investigative skills. Because increasingly we can find so much information online, but the skills of being able to analyze it and really dig deeper to find hidden information are what will be increasingly valued in the future, probably. So even if, for example, a major paper might join together with Yahoo to have them post their articles or have their articles be disseminated, but the time and effort to train really strong, competent journalists is an issue that we all need to think about critically going forward.
Thank you very much. We have about a minute left, and there is a very sort of important question which didn't come up, so I think I need to ask it. It's about your subscriber base. So, one of the interesting things for me at least, and I think for a lot of people, is why Japan has not developed a ProPublica or The Hill or any of the American sort of online investigative journal models. It doesn't seem to have happened here. So I'd be curious to know your opinion on why that is, and also if you could explain your subscriber base. Presumably you want people to subscribe to your newspaper.
Mm. それはとても難しい問題で、そうですね、なんでないんですかね。で、やはりまず生活がちゃんとできない。で、我々探査の場合は探査報道ですね、インベスティゲイティブリポートを専門としてやっています。なので独立していなくちゃいけない、あらゆる利害関係から。なので、市民社会の中から、ドネーションをもらってそれで運営しようというところなんでしょうけども、そのドネーションがなかなか集まらない。やはりそのジャーナリズムとかそういったものにドネーションするということにまだ価値を見出していない。なので、なかなかそういったモデル の非営利独立の、ニュースルームっていうのが出てこないっていうのがあると思います。だけども我々ジャーナリストまずここで
ありがとうございます。So to begin with, to answer why there aren't any other or that many online investigative media outlets in Japan. Well, the first is that it's difficult to be financially viable in the current environment. And if you can't acquire the funds to support your newsroom and to support your reporters, then I guess that's the most important part. If you can't pay your reporters a living wage, then you won't have any reporters. But that said, it's the most important thing for online investigative media is to be independent. So you can't give up your independence for financial security. So it's a really difficult balance to find. And so in our case, we look for, or we try to find donations from the average citizen and have the average citizen support our work voluntarily. We don't have a paywall. But it's a difficult environment in Japan because there isn't much of a culture of people finding it natural to give donations to the media. And there's still sometimes not as much understanding as we would like of the value of investigative journalism and the necessary role that investigative journalism plays in society. So we're still looking for some of those answers ourselves.
それで大事なことはただその社会の日本社会の文化のせいにしたらダメで、やはりジャーナリスト当事者がしっかり勇気を持って行動すると。だから我々も、そうですけども、生活ができなかったらどうしようとかいろいろな不安があるけども、そこはやっぱり一歩踏み出してリスクを取るということなんですね。そこのリスクを取る人がなかなか出てこないと。で僕もそうですけどもこのアナリスもそう、タンさんのスタッフっていうのはみんなその辺のリスクを取って今チャレンジしているんですね。だからそういった人がやっぱ出てこないと日本社会も盛り上がっていかない、どんどん出ていかないと。なのでタンさんに我々にはPlease donate
So although we can say things like, oh, there's not that much of a donation culture in Japan, or investigative journalism isn't understood, but that's really, that's putting responsibility on someone else, and there's also responsibility that we need to take for our own work and for what we want to accomplish. But given the current situation where there's not many people doing investigative journalism, it is a risk. And because it's risky, because there's no guarantee of financial security, and there's a lot of pressure against investigative journalists and their work. So it is risky, and that's why not many people have done it in Japan. But yeah, all of our members have decided to take that risk. But maybe, as you can see, and if you check our website, you will see there are not that many of us.
Thank you very much. Well, the good news is my students are watching, so maybe they'll step forward and help you out.
And please donate.
Yeah, I can't say please donate. I'm not going to go that far. But I will say, of course, we wish you all the best in your venture. And hopefully you'll come back when you score your next big scoop. So please do show your appreciation for Makoto Watanabe, Editor-in-Chief of newsroom Tansa, and of course Annalise, who did such a great job of interpreting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Just a note, by the way, I did get a question online, but it arrived too late, so I'll pass it on to you personally, and maybe you could answer it if that's okay via Elon. Yeah, thanks. And the other issue is that we give you a membership of the club for a year for turning up. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.